Welcome back to the Sky News Daily with me, Niall Paterson. Today, two men, two stories. Keir Starmer is off to Italy to investigate its successful migration strategy. We'll tell you why later. But first, Donald Trump and another attempt in his life.
We are coming on the air with breaking news about former President Donald Trump, who is safe, according to his campaign, as the FBI says it is investigating what appears to be an attempted assassination, in their words, of former President Trump.
On Sunday afternoon, the former president was playing around at his Trump International golf course in Palm Beach, Florida. Secret Service agents spotted a weapon pointing through a fence towards Mr. Trump.
Golf course, and we think that it was in this southeastern corner of the golf course that the gunman poked a gun through the fence onto the 5th, 6th or 7th hole while Donald Trump was playing golf.
Now, in the bushes where this guy was is a AK-47 style rifle with a scope, 2 backpacks which were hung on the fence that had ceramic tile in them, and a GoPro.
Despite Secret Service agents firing first, the suspect was able to escape, but was arrested soon after.
I can tell you that his name is Ryan Wesley Routh, R-O-U-T-H, and they are saying that he is the person in custody who was shot at by the Secret Service while possessing a semi-automatic rifle in Florida.
Donald Trump wasn't hurt in the incident. It's since emerged Routh had a number of convictions, including carrying a concealed weapon. He also claimed to be trying to recruit foreign fighters to the Ukrainian army. This is Routh speaking to Newsweek in 2022.
As human beings, we must support each other. We cannot turn our backs on anyone around the world and expect the problem to go away. Why world leaders are not sending military is beyond me. We're going to have to elect new leaders the next go around that have a backbone and that, have the fortitude to say, hey, we're not going to tolerate this type of behavior. This type of behavior is unacceptable. When you talk to a 20-year-old guy that sold everything he owns to come here to fight, that is heroism. He's coming here to risk his life for humanity, for the Ukrainians.
Now, that the former president is unhurt is, of course, the most important thing. But given everything stateside is viewed through the prism of the election, including and especially by Donald Trump himself, it's worth examining if this is likely to have any effect on the campaign. Back on the Sky News Daily, Scarlett Maguire, director at Pollsters JL Partners. Look, I suppose we have been here once before in terms of an assassination attempt on Donald Trump. How do we think this will shift the dials, if at all?
Yeah, we have been here before, and actually not only 2 months ago. I mean, if you think about the last assassination attempt, it was only less than 2 weeks later that Biden then stepped down. It was only a couple of weeks after that first disastrous debate for Biden. And so whilst the polls have changed a lot over the last few months, it can be quite hard to tell what's what. My instinct on this one is that it's not going to make a huge amount of difference. I think that's for a couple of reasons. I think firstly, because pretty much everything about Trump is baked in with the electorate. And we're seeing this time and time again. They know who he is. He's been on the American stage for decades. He's been in the political arena for nearly 10 years. People know exactly who he is, and people are already familiar with assassination attempts on his life. And this one, if anything, less dramatic. You don't have those pictures. And it's set in a slightly different context. When it happened in July, he was against a very, very weak opponent. He was about to go into the Republican National Convention, where he had an opportunity to present something approaching a unity candidate, I would say, to get everyone on board together. I think he slightly missed that. And so now against Kamala Harris, it's a bit of a different race. And I think this is not going to make that much of a difference.
On that first Trump assassination attempt, where did we see, if we did see at all, the polls shifting? Because, my understanding of US politics, much of this election is going to come down to a handful of swing states. Did we see the dial shift in those?
We did. What we were looking at the time of the assassination attempt was a race that was increasingly in Donald Trump's favour. So even though the margins in US elections of the past two, and I think this one as well, have been incredibly fine. We're talking less than 100,000 votes, tens of thousands of votes in a country of population of hundreds of millions. That's the sort of margins we're talking about. But even given that, the Trump was looking sort of 80 80+% in Trump's favor at the time that Biden stepped down, around the time of these assassination attempts. And you were seeing swing states moving outside of the margin of error in his direction. And it looked like he was going to be able to even quite comfortably given those tight margins, it's all relative, win the Electoral College. Biden dropping out changed everything, and that changed any assassination bounce that he got in these swing states. We then saw the Democrats make huge strides on where they had been before. I think part of that was a sugar rush. We've since seen it come down a little bit again, but it was quite hard to say how much of that was the assassination attempt, how much of it was the weak debate performance, and how much of it was Biden stepping down.
Just in terms, though, of the way in which, the United States does its politics, I mean, they do like to have a strong man as presidential candidate. So I wonder, when Donald Trump is using what has just happened at Mar-a-Lago and what happened before in terms of the shooter, actually connecting with him, does he use it to try and elicit pity from the American electorate? Does he use it to show up that he is that strong man character? Does he simply use it to raise money for the Trump election campaign?
It is hugely successful in raising money, these sorts of events. So were his legal problems, that assassination attempt too. No, I don't think he is looking for pity. He is, again, using it to convey strength. Think about those actually iconic images coming out of the assassination attempt in Pennsylvania Butler, with him fist pumping the air just seconds after someone shot his ear. Strength is a really key driver. In fact, it's the most important thing, how strong people perceive a candidate to be outside of how they voted in the previous election, as an indicator of how they're going to vote this time around. When it was Trump versus Biden, strength was something that was firmly in Trump's wheelhouse. He was winning that easily. Now, actually, it's a bit different. He is still ahead, but Kamala Harris has made huge strides.
I mean, Scarlett, given the amount of disinformation that we see just in US politics in general, but particularly in a presidential campaign involving Donald Trump, you've got to wonder, with not one but two assassination attempts on his life, a second individual, registered Democrat, the conspiracy theorists are going to have a field day with this one.
What is hard to understand about the American political and media ecosystem from the UK or from many other countries outside it is just how bifurcated it is. Republicans and Democrats tend to get their information streams, and I think increasingly so, from incredibly separate sources, which will tell them incredibly separate things. And I think that is a worry.
Kamala Harris, of course, has responded as you might expect her to do, saying that she's deeply disturbed by the incident, thankful that Donald Trump is safe. She condemns political violence. Look, in any other country in the world, if a presidential candidate was shot once and was about to be the victim of a shooting on a second occasion, there would be a debate about gun ownership. But we're just not going to see that.
The indications are that we're not going to see that. It's something that I can imagine a Kamala Harris a few years ago having quite a different response to. But we saw her very explicitly say in that debate, actually, that she and Tim Walz are gun owners themselves. They are not looking to take anyone's guns away. And I would have thought that given what the noises and the sounds that we've seen out of the Democrats, it's not something it looks like that Harris and Walz are going to push off the back of this assassination attempt. And it's certainly not something the Republicans are going to push. I mean, sadly, Americans are very used to assassination attempts on presidents, mostly failed, some, of course, successful. And I think that's sort of quite hard to get your head around if you're looking at it from the UK, the rhetoric, the assassination attempts, the money involved in politics. And actually, we've still got quite a few weeks of this race to go. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see quite a few more shocking things in between now and then. We've already had our fair share in the last 2 months alone.
Certainly have. Scarlett, before we let you go, just clear something up for me, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but the polling suggests at the moment that a Kamala Harris win is slightly more likely. If you look at the betting markets, the money going on the betting markets would suggest that the other is true, that Trump is on course.
I think at the moment, the polls are now back to 50-50. So I think this might change in the next week if we're seeing the effects from the debate settle in with the public. Obviously, that now might be skewed by the assassination attempt. But at the moment, even if in averages she is 1 or 2 points ahead in the national vote, that's not going to be enough for her. And actually, some of the swing states, especially Pennsylvania, look like they're edging a bit away from her again. The problem is with these is that the swing states are incredibly hard to poll. They're all now within the margin of error. She certainly pulled it a lot closer than to Biden. But if anything, I would say it's a coin toss, but with a coin ever so slightly weighted in Trump's favour at the moment.
Remind me never to gamble on the outcome of the toss of a coin with you, Scarlett Maguire. Thanks, Scarlett. The incident has, of course, sparked comment this side of the Atlantic. Here's Sir Keir Starmer.
So deeply troubled, let the investigation take its place, but absolute clarity. Violence, no place in political discussion at all, anywhere.
The PM was speaking in Italy, where he's travelled to learn about their attempts to deal with boats crossing not the Channel but the Med. We'll tell you why after this. Welcome back. Everyone agrees that people dying in the Channel is a bad thing, but that's pretty much where the consensus ends. Keir Starmer has differentiated his strategy from that of the Tories by focusing on smashing the gangs rather than stopping the boats. A new border command is being set up, and he's apparently willing to listen to others' ideas, hence his trip to Italy to see Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni.
But I am here today for a very simple reason, because I recognise Italy's significance as a leader in Europe, on the world stage, as a G7 economy, a NATO ally. And so as we open what I think will be a new era in Britain's relations with the EU, our close friendship and partnership with Italy is more important than ever. And that's why.
And we're joined now by our political correspondent, Darren McCaffrey, who is in fact just near, you can probably hear the sounds of a gathering taking place. He is at the Italian Prime Minister's residence in the hills above Rome. Darren, good to see you. What exactly is so attractive about Italy's migration strategy to Keir Starmer?
Well, I think it's very much that the numbers are down. If you look at where the Italian figures are when it comes to migration, the number of people trying to get across the Med is down some 60% in the past year. And Keir Starmer effectively has come here to learn lessons, if you like, about what the UK can do when it comes to the English Channel. Now, interestingly, the Italians have signed bilateral deals with the Libyans and the Tunisians. That's where most migrants tend to come from, if you like. They've signed a deal with Albania that's a little bit like the Rwanda deal, but not quite the same, i.e. that if you're a migrant crossing the Mediterranean and you're picked up by the Italians, you don't come to Italy first, you go to Albania, and that's where you get processed. The difference is that if you are a genuine asylum seeker, you'll actually get to come to Italy. If you're not, you're sent packing.
In terms of the way in which they have dealt very specifically with the boats coming across the Mediterranean, down 60% is a fantastic total. They describe it as dealing with the problem at source. What exactly does that mean?
There are two aspects of this, which is that how do you encourage people not to try and seek asylum, to migrate? And that's really difficult and really complex because people are leaving and fleeing countries for a whole plethora of reasons. The second idea, and the EU's been doing this for quite a long time actually, is to effectively get places like Libya and Tunisia to stop people, prevent them, house them from getting on the boat in the first place. Now that is much easier for countries in North Africa to do than it is for France, for example, to do. And there are also a lot of criticism because many of those encampments in North Africa are pretty nasty places where killings are pretty commonplace, rape, torture, and just all-round awfulness, if you like. So it is pretty controversial, but what it has done is driven down those numbers.
Yeah, it does look like, well, from where I'm sitting in London, admittedly, and not as close to the problem as you, but it does look like Italy has, in essence, paid off Tunisia and Libya for the right for their navy to enter those countries' waters and turn the boats back then, well before they've even reached Italian waters themselves.
Yeah, indeed. Keir Starmer today is making the point, actually, that these migrants don't necessarily always just stop in Italy, that they actually travel through into France and try to come to England. And that's why his argument is, fundamentally, this has to be a joint-up thinking. We need European cooperation. We need this sense that, yes, the Italians do one thing, but we also work with the Italians to help them because it will ultimately help us. But then this also comes at the same time in which cooperation has broken down elsewhere in Europe, where Germany's imposing restrictions on its borders against its European neighbours in an effort to stem migration. It is a massive topic. But in the end, the Prime Minister's argument today is that he needs to work with countries like Italy if it's ever going to be effective.
Sure, but questionable just how much Keir Starmer is in fact learning from Giorgia Meloni when it comes to boats crossing the Mediterranean / crossing the Channel. Tell me, though, just a little bit more about this Albania scheme, because very much like Rwanda, it does involve asylum claims being heard in another country.
So the idea behind this scheme is that if migrants are picked up from what are recognised by Italy as safe countries in the Mediterranean, that instead of coming to Italy to have their asylum claim processed here, actually they get taken straight to Albania, to these asylum centres they're building there. The asylum seekers will be housed there. The asylum process will be administered by Italian officials, but it will be on Albanian soil. They will not get to come to Italy. And so in the end, if their asylum claim is rejected, they are sent straight back home to whatever country they've come from. If, though, and this is the difference from the Rwanda plan, if their asylum is accepted, that they are genuine, legitimate asylum seekers, they do get to come to Italy. And that would not have been the case under the Rwanda plan. It is controversial. It is costly. The Albanians are earning hundreds of millions of euros from this deal. It also, by the way, has not properly started yet, so it's not quite been tested. But it is something the Prime Minister has not ruled out at looking at something Britain could do. I think the Italians, though, if we're going to be honest about this, have a bit of an advantage in the sense that Albania is not an EU country and it is right next door. Clearly, places like Rwanda for the UK are a long way away.
Controversial, certainly. Costly, absolutely. So what on earth is Sir Keir Starmer doing even considering it? I mean, if this is for a deterrent effect, 70 to 80% of asylum applications, when they finally get through the process in the United Kingdom, they are successful. So I don't see being told that after the end of the process, you might have to go and spend some time in Albania, but you'll still get to the United Kingdom, that this will have any deterrent effect whatsoever.
Yeah, and that's the point the Conservative Party are making. And in the end, they would say, very well to hear Keir Starmer talk about smashing the gangs, very well to hear about his border command centre. But in the end, that's not going to act as a deterrent. The people are still want to come to the UK. I think ultimately the government would make the case that what they're trying to do is disrupt the kind of people who enable migrants to move, and also to try and deal with things a little bit more at source, and in the end hoping that will work. But you're also right in pointing out that he's dealing with Giorgia Meloni, who is, in European terms, quite a right-wing politician. I mean, her political party were once linked to the fascists in Italy during the Second World War. There are many people back in Britain, many Labour MPs who've actually voiced their disquiet that Keir Starmer is somehow coming to Italy to learn lessons effectively from the Italians on this issue. There are many that want to see more safe routes open up. They think that will help actually cut down on channel crossings. These are two very different politicians from different ends of the political spectrum.
I mean, you've mentioned there, Darren, that the kind of the magical mystery tour that Sir Keir Starmer has been on in terms of his foreign trips. You're shortly going to be heading back on the plane with him. I mean, how has he developed as a kind of a foreign statesman over the first few days of his time in Downing Street? I mean, we shouldn't forget the fact that one of the stories that's followed him all the way there and will follow him back involves him receiving donations of £16,000 worth of suits and £2,500 worth of glasses from a Labour donor, Wahid Ali. I mean, some things never change, do they?
Two glasses Keir, I think they call him, don't they? Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting story. And you're right in suggesting, there are all these questions about what he, as Prime Minister, and indeed his wife, have potentially received in donations, whether it was properly declared, whether actually as a man who, as the leader of the opposition, made it very clear that people need to be open and transparent in their politics and not rely on a small number of donors, is doing them himself in office. Downing Street have admitted they have made some mistakes, that the guidance wasn't terribly clear in declaring some stuff, particularly when it comes to the Prime Minister's wife. But it does build in, doesn't it, to that sense, if you set yourself up as being kind of someone who is going to be whiter than white and super clean and obey all the rules, and there's even a question mark that you've not necessarily done so, then you invite questions. Prime Ministers do like to kind of press the flesh, if you like, on the world stage, but he's soon off to New York, to the UN, to give a speech there. He's got the Commonwealth Summit in Samoa in a couple of months' time, going via Australia. And also, I think there's a G20 in Rio. So, he's certainly racking up the air miles too, it must be said, though, of course, on official business.
Darren, we will let you and your man from Del Monte suit get back to the reception at the Prime Minister's residence in the hills above Rome. Good to chat to you. Thanks for being with us. And that is your lot for this edition of The Daily. We'll be back tomorrow from the Lib Dem Party conference in Brighton. See you then.